Hey, we've got a problem here.
What did you do?
Nothing. I stirred the tanks.
Whoa. Hey.
This is Houston. Say again, please.
Houston, we have a problem.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and there's been a string of accusations of grooming young women in the comic book industry been going on for almost a week now. I wanted to cover on the channel, but I've been having a hard time kind of wrapping my head around how I want to address it. And plus, after a couple of days, the sheer volume of it was honestly a bit overwhelming when you see the amount of names on there, the amount of allegations and everything. And then it kind of becomes, if I cover this person but not this person, am I showing favoritism, even if it's similar allegations? If I'm lumping this allegation in with this allegation that are different, am I kind of saying they're the same thing? So I was having a tough time coming to grips with how exactly I wanted to cover this, but I think I'm ready to talk about it today. I'm going to talk about the initial allegation against Cameron Stewart, an artist that's done a lot of work on Batgirl and stuff like that. I feel that like this situation is a little bit more black and white. Going to cover that first, just because that was the thing that kind of started everything. And like I said, I think it's a bit more black and white. And then I'm going to get into the Warren Ellis accusation, because I do think it is a good representation about an issue within the industry. And he's also the biggest name, so there's been the most coverage on that allegation, so there's the most information available. So I'm going to talk about that, and then I'm going to talk about, in generality, the problems within the industry and maybe how they can be addressed. What are the problems? How do you identify them? Who's responsible for policing behavior within the comic book industry? The way the industry is managed and kind of run, and how you get your name out there and how you get discovered, I think has a lot to do with the issues that we're going to be discussing here. So I am going to talk about, kind of that, generally speaking. And also, I think Perch and I disagree on some of these points, or maybe I've misinterpreted, his point of view on this. So I am going to try and bring him on the channel tomorrow to talk about this and have a conversation about our different points of view on this issue. So first, I am going to talk about the Cameron Stewart allegations. They were very similar to recent allegations against Cerebrus writer Dave Sims. There was a tweet about a week ago where a female artist in the industry said that when she was 16 years old, she believes Stewart was in his early 30s. He befriended her. They started texting. He was flirting with her. He even took her out on a date. And according to her, he was using his status and influence in the industry essentially to groom her, presumably for future sexual or romantic interests, things like that. This one isn't completely black and white, but I do feel like it's more black and white than the Warren Ellis things, because she was 16 at the time. I think if you are employing a comic book creator in their 30s and they're using that status to go and manipulate, influence, coerce young women under the age of 18, I think that's wrong. And if you disagree with me and you think that it's okay for men in their 30s to court and date and sext and do other things like that with women, at the age of 16, 15, 17, then we're just going to have a difference of opinion. I don't agree with that at all. I think that's inappropriate behavior. And I think that's a fireable offense, to be completely honest. I think that DC had every right in the world to remove him from that project and to not employ him in the future. Men or women in their 30s using their status, within the industry to coerce teenage boys and girls under the age of consent is wrong, in my opinion. And I know that there are different ages of consent for different places, but for me, if you're under the age of 18, it's wrong. Whether you're in Kentucky, whether you're in California, whether you're in New York, no matter where you are. But I can acknowledge that those laws are in existence, and people probably do disagree with my take on that one, and that's okay. We don't have to agree on everything, but I firmly believe that DC Comics and any other publisher in the industry that does not want to do business with Cameron Stewart in the future is doing the right thing for their company and probably the right thing for the industry. I think that's a responsible response to the allegations, if they're true. And I do have an assumption that because DC dropped him from a future project, that they have information or beliefs that these are likely true, and that's why they took that action. Of course, I could be wrong, and they could totally be making these decisions based solely on the information that was provided on Twitter by the young woman who claims that he was grooming her at the age of 16. And if that was the case, I would still support DC shutting down that project until they got more information and they could make a more informed decision. because those are serious allegations and they should be taken very seriously. And future employment should be on the line with allegations like that. So I've talked about the Cameron Stewart allegations that were obviously the flashpoint for all of the allegations that have come in. And it's not just on Warren Ellis. There are a lot of creators in there. It was a huge list. There's a lot of allegations. I am going to talk about Warren Ellis specifically, like I said, because it's had the most coverage and he's the best known creator that was on there. Now, I imagine a lot of people want to know my opinion on this, if I think canceling Ellis in this circumstance is appropriate. And I've got to tell you up front, before I go into all this information and before I talk about it, I don't know. I honestly do not know, because I do not personally have information about the policies at DC Comics or any of the other publishers regarding what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior as far as workplace. And in this case, as a creator, where does the workplace end? Does the workplace end when Warren Ellis is not working on a DC project? Does Warren Ellis's workplace include when he's out promoting projects that aren't for DC, but maybe comic books related, or if he's just promoting the comic book industry? Does it end when he goes to a comic convention where he's out there promoting himself and his own brand, talking about his work at DC, but other publishers? I don't know what DC's policies are. I don't know what Marvel's policies are. I don't know what Image's policies are. I think it would be nice if they put those things out there. And if it is out there for people to read and consume, please drop a link in the comments section, or you can DM me on Twitter so I personally can have a more informed opinion about these matters. So there you go. I don't know if he should be canceled in this. I think a lot of people are going to have a lot of different opinions. Some people are going to be, you're damn right, he should be canceled. Other people are going to be like, he absolutely shouldn't be canceled, because I do think there is a lot of gray room that we're working with here. I do want to say, as far as cancel culture goes, and I'm very anti-cancel culture, I do believe that policing personal beliefs or ideology is not even similar to the same thing as policing behavior. And with what we're seeing here with the allegations against Cameron Stewart and Warren Ellis, I think these are clearly behavioral issues and not reflections of personal beliefs or ideology. Now, you could say that, maybe Cameron Stewart believes that it's okay for men in their 30s or 40s to date women that are 16. And I'm just not going to agree with you on that one. I don't think that's an ideology. I think that's behavior personally, but I could see how other people could have a difference of opinion with me on that one. When you're saying, Wes, but you say that you don't agree with cancel culture. I don't agree with cancel culture when it's trying to police people's beliefs, ideology, their thoughts. I don't think policing behavior is the same thing. And I don't even know if that falls into cancel culture. That might just be, that's more likely responsible behavior by the publisher or the company or whatever industry that you're working in once you start making these kind of behaviors, especially if they're against policy and things like that. So before we get into it, I am going to read some snippets from the Mary Sue article that talked about it, that talks about some of the allegations. I'm also going to read a specific tweet from Jane Holmes that I do think there's a line in there. And if that line means what I think it could mean, this would be much less gray and much more black and white as far as appropriate, inappropriate behavior. So let's read the articles and some of the details. Warren Ellis, whose work looms large in the comics world and is also known for his novels and TV writing for Netflix's Castlevania, has issued a statement following accusations of sexual misconduct. Earlier this week, as part of an ongoing Twitter conversation about improprieties in comics land concerning several men, Ellis was accused by writer Katie West of what amounted to sexual coercion. West then deleted her original tweet thread explaining, quote, "I don't want this to ruin my life, and I don't want it to ruin anyone else's," unquote. But at that point, to paraphrase others who subsequently shared their experience with Ellis, the door to the bloody chamber had been kicked open. Musician Meredith Yayanos and writer-photographer Jane Holmes also spoke up in order to defend West's claims and confirm that their own relations with Ellis mirrored her allegations. And this is the tweet from Jane Holmes that I did want to talk about right here. More stories are coming in. The pattern is dreadfully clear. 1, he found me when I was young, vulnerable, uncertain. 2, he acted like a mentor, gave me so much appreciated attention. 3, but pushed boundaries. 4, he said I was his world. We were best friends. He was my thrilling secret. He supported my career. That's the one I want to talk about. So I didn't feel like I could say no. 5, he dropped me. I blame myself. So when she says he supported her career, how did he do that? Did he use his influence within the industry to get her jobs? Or was he merely a friend and mentor telling her she was doing good work? Or maybe he was even going in there and helping her with some editing and tightening things up, or giving her feedback to put out a better product. Those are two completely different things. But she also says, I didn't feel like I could say no. That right there implies to me that he was using his influence, or she felt like he was using his influence to help propel her career, and that he would use his influence to maybe derail her career. And that's where we get into appropriate versus inappropriate. Now, if someone is using their status or their influence in the industry to gain sexual or romantic access to someone because they will propel their career, or maintain that because they will derail their career, now we're talking in, very black and white terms. That is inappropriate, and that's fireable in my opinion. That's not canceling. That's getting your ass canned, for cause. But we can't decipher that out of that sentence because it's too vague. And that's one of the issues I'm personally having, going through all this. There's a lot of vague allegations. They could mean something, and if they did, it would be very wrong. But they also could mean something else that didn't quite go up to that line. So we're dealing in more grays in that area. The article continues. Several more women have since come forward to support their fellows and acknowledge that they had their own stories about Ellis. A private chat that Holmes set up for those with similar experiences is now said to number around 50 people. On Twitter, Denver Primrose wrote, I have years of emails from Warren Ellis leading me to think we were friends, then leading into sex chat. It was like a clang in my head when I joyously mentioned talking to other creators, and he dropped me. And I think that gives you a good idea of what these allegations against Warren Ellis are, from that Mary Sue article. And like I said, we're dealing with a lot of gray, at least in my mind. Did this warrant DC Comics dropping Warren Ellis's 2-page, origin story of Dinobat in Dark Knight's Death Metal Legend of the Dark Knight one-shot? In this case, it might very well be appropriate. That story is tied in with the release of an anthology. That's a bunch of other stories with a bunch of other creators. If DC Comics are still looking into these allegations, they probably should just pull the story. They're obviously replacing it with a story from Marguerite Bennett and Jamal Igle. Don't know if that's still going to be Dinobat, if it's another story that they're going to throw into the anthology. But they have a replacement story ready. It was only 2 issues, but it was tied to an event and other artists, and they probably don't need to be associated with these allegations against Warren Ellis. If DC Comics haven't vetted this properly and they don't know what the right way forward is, just pull this story off, go in, look at the details, and come up with a decision later. Or this could be the decision. DC Comics might very well just be ending their relationship with Warren Ellis moving forward. Obviously, that is complicated a bit because Warren Ellis and Bryan Hitch currently have the Batman's Grave miniseries. I believe it's supposed to be 12 issues. I think issue 6 or 7 just released, so it's supposed to be going on for another 6 months. Batman's a big character for DC Comics. He's a big seller. And I imagine that miniseries was somewhat significant to DC Comics. Obviously, if they have information that these allegations are true, and if it violates one of their policies or something like that, they should probably just end the series and sever ties with Warren Ellis at this time and revisit it and revisit the relationship in the future if they so choose. If not, if they don't know which way to go, they should probably suspend that one as well. And once they come up with a decision, you come up with your decision. But that's one of the really big problems with all this. I do not know what DC Comics policies are. Like I said, what is their definition of a workplace relationship, workplace environment? Comic books are really weird. Warren Ellis probably does the majority of his work in his home. If someone comes over to his house and they are in the comic book industry, are they in his work environment? Could you say that's inappropriate behavior? When he goes to a Comic-Con, if DC Comics didn't pay him to be there and he's not there on their behalf, is that a DC Comics workplace environment? If someone from another publisher calls him for advice and he's giving advice on comic books and that conversation goes inappropriate, is he violating company policy? Is that within a workplace environment? And quite frankly, I could see how he could really convoluted and really complex looking at the situation and his position in the industry, because he doesn't just work for DC Comics. I know he works for Image. I imagine he has a relationship with Marvel. He's obviously done comics with them. He's probably done comics with a lot of publishers, including Boom and Dark Horse and other publishers. When do his actions affect DC Comics policy, or does DC Comics even really have a policy in place when talking about this? And I also want to acknowledge this is not solely a comic industry issue. A very similar event is going on right this minute in professional wrestling with similar allegations, and in my opinion, a lot worse as far as coercion and manipulation. If you don't do this sexual act, I will get you fired kind of things. I haven't seen those specific allegations as much in the comic book stuff. But like I said, there's a lot of allegations. It's a lot of information to actually get through. I do think one of the questions we do have to ask ourselves, and I think it's an appropriate question, do the publishers and the other industries within the comic book industry actually want to stop this behavior? Obviously, it's been going on for years. The allegations against Warren Ellis go back decades at this point. We know that the allegations against Eddie Berganza had gone back years in scope. We know that the allegations against Eric Esquivel were known in the industry. Those were known behaviors, and that they still continue to employ them. So you could easily say that maybe the comic book industry and the leadership don't want to stop the behavior. They don't want to address the behavior, or perhaps they don't feel like they can. You could certainly come to that conclusion. Now, one of the big issues I think we do need to come up with is identifying the problem. Now, is the problem powerful creators using their status to exploit people for sex? Basically using their status as maybe a superstar in comics to gain access or entry to people they would like to have a sexual or romantic relationship with, but not using, promises of promotions, jobs, or using threats of I'll get you fired or I'll get you taken off that book. Now, that would be really hard to police. At what point do you say you're such a well-known creator or you're so influential in the industry, you could no longer date or flirt or sex with people within the industry? That would be really hard to police, in my opinion. At what point are these creators off the clock and free to talk or even be skeezy or assholes or pricks or say inappropriate things or make sexual advances on people that they're interested in? At what point are they off the clock? Because as long as they're not implying that they can get advancement or derailment of their job, or they're not using an official title within the industry, I don't know that you can police that. Warren Ellis and other older creators in the comic book industry, if they are attracted to younger women, as long as they are of age, and they don't work at the same publisher, or Warren Ellis doesn't have the ability to influence their job at another publisher, it seems like something you can't really police. Is he even doing anything wrong at that point from a professional stance? Because, you read the allegations and you're like, that's skeezy behavior. Seems like he might be a scumbag. But that's on a personal level. But on a professional level, where does that seep into there? Where's the line drawn? And I think that's one of the issues. We haven't identified that problem. Where is that line? Now, if these creators are offering jobs or threatening loss of work, things like that, now we're talking black and white. Those are behaviors that need to be policed. That kind of stuff needs to be kicked out of the industry. You can't have people using their job or their status or their influence or the responsibilities that are a part of their day-to-day job, whether it be hiring and firing, and holding that over younger creators or even an older creator that didn't have as much status or influence, holding that over them and coercing them and using that status and privilege, which they should be taking very responsibly, using that to exploit people in a sexual or any manner. If you are a publisher at a comic book company and you told somebody, I will let you work at my company, but you have to give me a personal loan so I can do this, that's wrong. Like, you are abusing your authority. Obviously, when we start taking things into the sexual realm, it's much more salacious. But that's those are black and white issues. If that is happening, that's absolutely a problem and should be addressed not tomorrow. That should be addressed today. That should be not only in DC Comics policy, that should be in the policy of every comic book publisher in the industry. And it should probably be a policy of the people at cons and things like that, that if you're the person that is responsible for bringing in creators and giving them space to sell their wares, you cannot hold that over them in any way, especially sexually or for money and things like that. Also, I do think one of the big problems in the industry, and I don't think a lot of comic pros are going to agree with me, is that tiny little community that they say is the strength of it, that they can police themselves. It's quite obviously they can't police themselves. This nice, tight-knit community that it's so tightly woven that everybody knows each other is a real problem. And it's a problem in the hiring as well, because there's no clear entry point into comic books. Like, how do you become a comic book writer? Well, you can go over and cover the industry for a news site. Of course, you, for the most part, have to cover them in a nice manner and say nice things about these and develop personal relationships that way. One of the ways that I'm always told, if you want to be in the industry, you got to go to comic conventions, you got to network, you got to go become friends with these guys, go buy them a drink, go to the bar. Well, if that's the way you have to get in the industry, that certainly puts young women in a very vulnerable state, or young men for that matter, because now alcohol is involved, there's peer pressure. Maybe you witness somebody else doing something like that, and you think you have to do that to get a foot in the industry, whether it's true or not. Although I will say this, from some of the stories I have heard from Perch and other people, it sounds like it probably is true. There's far too much of a good old boy network within the comic book industry, and that stuff needs to be dismantled. Way too much nepotism, way too much cronyism, way too much good old boy network as a way of getting a foot in the industry. And there's the other problems that come along with it, like low quality writing, low quality art, people that don't have the requisite skills to be working in the industry, having jobs, good paying jobs, while other people that are better writers, more talented artists are left out because they didn't use that good old boy network. They didn't go put their foot in the door. Maybe they didn't go do that sexual favor that was implied that if they did, they could get that job. And I do believe the industry is fostering that. And so that idea that one of the biggest strengths of the industry, it's so tight-knit and closed, I think is absolutely a vulnerability and one of the reasons this problem exists. And I'm sure there are other problems that need to be identified and put out there that are contributing to this. But even if we do identify all the problems, like I said earlier, do the publishers and other industry leaders want to stop the behavior? Do they want to address the problems? Now, if they do, they should absolutely hold a summit, bring some of these people that have been going on Twitter with some of their testimonial, bring them on there, do it in private. If they're not comfortable talking about out in open, talk to them about some of the details, some of the issues, and then we can come up with strong policy with some actual teeth into them to address this stuff and do it uniformly throughout the industry. Because until that happens, Warren Ellis doesn't just work for DC Comics. He works for a lot of publishers. And a lot of the creators aren't exclusive to one publisher. A lot of them have their hands in a lot of cookie jars spread throughout the industry. Those are just kind of my thoughts on it. Like I said, there's a lot of gray here, not a whole lot of black and white for me. We do need more information as far as some of the allegations against Warren Ellis for me to really make a determination, because I don't know. Should he be canceled or not? If DC Comics, thinks that he violated a policy and there were terms to terminate it, then that's what they probably should do. But that information isn't out there, and it's really hard to glean that or make that kind of informed decision because a lot of the allegations are vague. And I do not blame the victims on this one. I would be vague about them too. Nobody wants to talk about this stuff in the open. It's very difficult, and I would never pressure anyone to do that. You can do an investigation. You can release the findings without going into specifics on who said what and who exactly was doing what and get some of this stuff cleaned up. But I'm absolutely not victim shaming. I can see how some people may say that. But me personally, as an intelligence analyst, it's hard for me to just take people's word at face value. There's always two sides to every story. And a lot of times the truth could be somewhere in the middle. You never know. You really do have to get a lot more information on these things. So it is a complicated thing. I do agree with what DC Comics did as far as Cameron Stewart goes. As far as Warren Ellis and all the issues plaguing the industry, there's a lot of work to do and a lot of soul searching that needs to go on. And hopefully the comic book industry is able to address these things head on, like responsible leadership should within the industry, and get some of this cleaned up, because it sounds like there's some rot at the core of the comic book industry.